And I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So we have a fun group today. Everybody, we will be using the chat box because I like to make it really interactive. So if you haven't yet, this is my Instagram. You can jump over to Instagram and follow me there. I'd love to get to know you. I just think it's fun meeting people, and that's why the book club is something I love doing. Books and meeting people, it's like my two favorite things. So yeah, go over to Instagram. You can join there. So my name's Lara Johnson. I'm a certified life coach for moms specifically, but I work with men, women, all different ages, and I love it so much. I've got 3 kids myself. My oldest, his birthday's tomorrow. He turns 10, which is double digits. That's a little crazy for me. And then a 7 and a 3-year-old. So we're like in the mix of motherhood and all of the joys of that, and it's wonderful. Now, and this is why like this book I love so much, because I remember getting to a point in my own life where I was doing specific behavior. So I'm going to read a list of these behaviors that I was doing, and I want you to tell me if any of these stand out to you or if you've done any of these behaviors before. So if you have ever ugly cried during Moana when she's staring out at the ocean, or The Greatest Showman when they're talking about a million dreams, or Frozen 2 when they're like going into the unknown when she feels this stirring inside. So if you've ever ugly cried during those, if you feel like you have a ringing inside of you that you can't answer, like something's calling to you, but you don't know what. If you have tons of ideas, but you're not acting or moving forward on any of them. If you feel stuck, stumped, or always on the cusp of something like their next growth. If you scroll more than you post, or if you wish more than you do. If you find yourself rage cleaning your house, and it's more than like once a quarter, but you get really angry about your house and the state it's in. If you're constantly stressed and constantly busy, but you don't feel productive, like you're not checking things off your list regularly. If you hate setting goals because you never reach them, or you forget about them, or you are reaching your goals and you get totally burned out in the process and you forget to eat and you don't sleep. If your mind is on a different planet when you're with your loved ones, instead of like connecting one-on-one with them, your mind's like some other location. So tell me if any of those stood out to you, and if you've ever done any of those, or what you are feeling and hope to get out of this book club. So if any of those stood out to you, Frozen 2, The House, Mind and Business, yes, Linda, all of those. So if this is something that you've experienced, you are in the right place, and this is the right book for you. All of the above. Yes, Cameron. Yes, you are in the right place. That's what I really want you to see. Now, what starts to happen is that when these things start to happen, that we go to the place of more, where we think we need more motivation, we need more time management or better time management. We think we need more decluttering within our house. We think we need more vacations or breaks. Like all of these things, or we need to run away. Like if you've ever felt like you just need to run away and that's the solution, I want you to get really clear that this is what our brain is offering as the solution for that list I just read. The pain that you're experiencing right now, this is what your brain is offering. But as a mom, as a woman, these are short-term fixes, and you know that because once you do them, you feel good, but it doesn't last and it doesn't change things going forward. And every single time we tell ourselves we need more exercise, we need to eat better, we get overwhelmed and burn out even faster and get even more discouraged. So this is the solution that our brain keeps giving to us, but this is not the long-term solution. This is why I love this book so much, because it gives us what the long-term solution is. And this is why the work that like I do as a life coach is so essential. And you'll learn more about like what thought work is and all of that in the book. So I want you to get really clear that today you're going to be learning the long-term solution to all of those pains that I just read to you. So he gives us I love when authors start books out like this. Like the very first sentence, if somebody starts out with like all their accolades, I just put the book down. Like, I don't want to read. He says, the one problem that holds you back, I call it the upper limit problem, and I haven't met a person who didn't suffer at least a little bit from it. So he tells us right now what the answer is, and he calls it the upper limit problem. So we are going to be referring to this, or you can write it down in your notes. If you already have your notebook, fantastic. If you don't, go and grab it, because we're definitely going to be using it, or you will want to use it. Let's put it that way. All right, so he calls it your upper limit problem. And he says that if you do not know your upper limit problem, if you are not, hold on, let me just, okay. Sorry, I'm just letting a couple people in really quick. If you're not aware of it, that this upper limit problem will drag you down until the day you die. I mean, if that's not a warning, I don't know what is, but I don't really want to be dragged down to the day that I die. So he talks about the upper limit problem will drag you down if you are not aware of it. And that's why it's so essential for you to learn what it is. So the way he describes the upper limit problem is it's the limit of positive emotions that you can handle before your brain starts creating negative thoughts to deflate you back down. So when we get to this spot, it looks a little bit like this. And something you should know about me is that I am not an artist and I will only draw in stick figures, okay? So say you're moving along in your goals, you know, whatever that is, whatever you feel, and you start having these shackles. Now you'll start moving forward, but in this bag right here that's connected to your shackles are all these rocks, okay? This is like the negative thoughts that your brain will manufacture to stop you from moving forward in your life. Everybody's brain does this. Okay, so if you're noticing that it's happening, it's okay. Totally normal, totally human. So at this point, anytime you start to feel good, your brain starts to panic, because it is, the way he describes it in the book is that he says we have millions of nerve connections that are there to regulate and register pain. That's the way our brain has evolved. That's just a normal human brain. But it hasn't been within, like our brain hasn't yet evolved to feel good naturally on its own. Like we have to train it and teach it and foster that feeling of, that sense of feeling good. And just to be clear, like and I love his definition that he has for feeling good. It's not being happy all the time. The way he describes it in the book, it's like this natural inner sense of well-being. Like you're still feeling emotions, but you're feeling fulfilled and purposeful and all of that goodness kind of mixed in. So it's just like this natural state of being that starts to happen. That's when I talk about feeling good. That's what we're reaching for. So he says at this point, any single time you start moving forward, you have a thermostat to how far you will go before your brain will start adding in all of these negative thoughts. And it will slow you down till the day you die. This is why he's talking about like drag you down. This is what he's talking about. So he said that it's important for us to have this like almost rebellious, like radical act that we teach our brain how to move beyond what this upper limit problem is. And so that's what we're going to be talking about, because when we move beyond that, we start moving into our zone of genius. This is the spot where we are reaching our full potential. This is the place where we're doing the work that we're meant to do on this earth, making the mark that we are meant to make. So when you get to this point, there are people that will jump up to this, but if they have not recognized their upper limit problem, it will pull them backwards and you will snap back to this spot with all of the negative thoughts and feelings that your brain will create. Now you'll see that a lot of people are uncomfortable with this way of living. And here's a couple phrases that you'll hear a lot, because there are there are people that are not aware of their upper limit problem, and you probably didn't know until you read this book. So a couple things, like your brain will offer a reality check. Like, it's important to be realistic. Another way that somebody will describe this is that they tell themselves that they're a realist, and they use that as like a very proud, like almost like a badge of honor. But what they're saying is that this line exists here, and they know that this line exists here, and we should stay behind that line. This is why he calls this the radical act of learning what your upper limit problem is and how to move beyond it. It is radical because it is not well known, and people are not, they don't know that this is possible. And it feels very against their nature, because it is. Our brain hasn't been programmed it. So how we have to first understand, and this is what he talks about in the book, Gay Hendricks, about how do we prepare for our big leap. So he said that there's a couple things that we have to really get clear on. And I love the questions that he uses in the book. So if you do have like the actual book, like go back and highlight, a lot of these questions. I'm going to be talking about some of them here, but just something to be aware of. Sorry, I'm trying to move that light so you can see a little bit better. So one of the first questions he says is, how am I getting in my own way? So I'm going to give you a second to ask your brain this. Now, this is the powerful thing about questions, is when you slow down long enough and ask yourself a question, it will give you an answer. Now, the first thing that will happen, and this is part of the upper limit problem, the first thing that will happen is your brain will say, I don't know. Okay, just plan on that, of course. So then you just stay with it, say, okay, I get that you don't know, but what if I did know? How am I getting in my own way? Your brain will start to open up. So I want to give you a chance. Go to your piece of paper, write this question down. How am I getting in my own way? And I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to really just sit and let your brain like stew on that and come up with something. And yes, Linda, so we're going to keep talking about that. Yes, the big leap is crossing over that upper limit problem and moving into that zone of genius. So there's some spots past the upper limit problem, and we'll talk about those. But yeah, it's the big leap is moving into that zone of genius. And in order to do that, you got to work through your upper limit problem. Okay, so go back to the question, how am I getting in my own way? And you can go over to the chat box. Oh, you're welcome, Linda. Go over to the chat box, and if you're comfortable sharing, you can tell us, how am I getting in my own way? I see this all the time in my clients. One of the clients I was coaching this morning, one of the things that she was getting in her own way was that she really had a hard time making decisions. That's a very common one. We all have a hard time making decisions. These were holding her back in her life, and all of it came from her perfectionistic desires to always get something right. And so she was just stopped making decisions because she didn't know what the right decision was. So that's some way. For me, like when I really realized this for myself, how was I getting in my own way, is I was scared of people seeing me fail. Like that was really legitimate to me. And that was so challenging to work through that. You worry too much what others think. Yes, that is such a common one. I can't tell you how many times that comes up on my coaching calls, like everyone, which is kind of like refreshing, I guess, in a way, Tish, is that everyone is worried what everyone else is thinking. And so you know that they're not really thinking about you because they're too busy worried about what people are thinking about them. So just a little side note. Okay, so when we get to this point, there's a couple things that really start to stand out, is that doubt will start to come up, that we doubt our capabilities, we tout the possibility that it's possible for us to live in our zone of genius. Now, there is no belief, please. There is no upside to doubting yourself. Just be clear on that. We think it's going to help us, when in reality, that is where we always get blocked in that upper limit problem, that wall that we hit. So doubt is a big way that we get into our own mind. Another one is fear. Now, fear will always show up for us, and that's the whole theme of the book is how to overcome our hidden fears. But what I love is what he said is that most of the time when you really work with your fear and get down to it, that we all have a fear of owning our full potential. Now, most of the time, the surface level things like what will people think of me, this fear of failure, like all of that will exist there. But if you give your brain a chance to really stay with that, what you'll typically find is that there's a fear of owning your full potential and it not being good enough at that point. Yes, fear of success, it is a real thing, having this fear of success. And so at this point, I want you to just think for a minute in a different way about fear. This is what he talks about in the book. He said, fear is excitement without breath. This is on page 18. He said, we get to this spot where our body will respond to this fear in a very physical way by holding our breath. We are denying breath to ourselves. And that's our way of like pulling back from success, from pulling back from our potential, of almost like bracing ourselves for impact. So when you get to this point and you come up to one of your fears, you start to take a deep breath and really allow that excitement of like, allow that possibility and almost like lean towards it. And it will start to propel you forward into that exhilaration of your zone of genius. So then really that's where at that point, when you start to lean into those fears, that's when you start to see what your gifts are. And we're going to talk more about that in just a second. So let me know any questions you have so far up until this point. So we're going to dive more into what the upper limit problem is and how it works. But before we do that, I want you to get really clear, on your fear, like lean into it and you'll know when it starts to show up. Okay, so at this point, he talks about in order to prepare for the big leap, you have to know how your upper limit problem works. So he talks about in the book, there's like, I'm not going to use that picture. We're going to use this. He talks about how every person, has their own thermostat. Okay. And let's just say you're at 5 degrees. It looks like a 50. It's 5 degrees. Okay. That's like the limit of positive emotions that you can feel on your thermostat. Okay. So when we start to, start approaching our fears, when we start realizing what our gifts are, we get to this point where we start to feel positive emotions. Now, what will happen in this moment is we may go beyond this on our thermostat, just like I mentioned before in a different visual. When we get to this spot up here, 2 things will start to happen. We will first have our old beliefs start to kick in, and they will bring us back down to this 5 degrees, or we start developing new beliefs that will raise our ability to have more positive emotions. It will literally change what our thermostat says when we start to develop these new beliefs. When we get to this and we start developing this new belief, he talks about how there's different zones that we live in. So the first zone that we live in is the zone of incompetence. Within this zone of incompetence, he talks about these are just the activities that we're not good at. Like there's a lot of things I'm just not good at. I know that about myself. Okay, so then the next zone is competence. And within competence, this is things that we do okay, but others do a lot better than us. And most of the time we'll see other people's zone of genius and we'll start judging ourselves because that's their gifts and we think that that should be ours as well. I did this for a long time with creative people. I didn't think I was a creative person because I didn't sing, I didn't do art, I didn't do any of those typically creative things, but I realized the way that I believe is very creative. My writing abilities are very creative. So that's, zone of competence. Okay, so then we've got our next zone, which is our zone of excellence. And he talks about how the zone of excellence is amazing. This is where we start becoming successful. This is where we have really good lives. And this is where our soul goes to die. Which I think is so interesting. Really think about that. It's not in our incompetence. It's not in our competence. It's in our excellence that our soul goes to die. He says that there is a seductive lure that exists within the zone of excellence, that we never get to that next level of living, that we never push, we never take that big leap into our zone of genius. Which leads us into what is the zone of genius. So in the zone of genius, as he describes, he says, this is where you feel that call. This is where you start embracing what your unique gifts are to the world. This is where it's almost like time starts to flow and work doesn't feel like work. And suddenly you are moving and existing in a very different environment. This is your zone of genius. So I want you to think for yourself in your life, in your hopes, in your dreams, what zone are you currently living in? And you can go over to the chat box and share if you're comfortable with that. I realized even just going through this book that there are times where I am here and there are times that I'm here. It's like I oscillate between the two right now. And so for me, like really being able to embrace my zone of genius and move into that full potential is really important. So go to the chat box. You can share what it is, which zone that you're currently living in, as I get this next little bit up. Okay, so think about that for yourself. Kind of between the zone of competence and excellence, depending on the day. Yes, so that's such good awareness. Like we can never move zones without awareness of where we are. So get really clear on where you are, write it down. Between 2 to 3. Yeah, so all of them at different times. Perfect, Erica. So that's where you start, and we're going to talk more about how to stay in that zone of the zone of genius, number 4, even more. So competence and excellence depending on the career path. So important to understand. Okay, so keep commenting over there. So when we get to this spot and we recognize these different zones and we want to start moving beyond the zones, there's some barriers that we have to overcome. So the first barrier that we have to break through. And he says it's important to break through these things because in order to make that leap into your zone of genius, you have to break through these barriers. And it's not just enough to break through them. You have to integrate and stabilize within each of these new zones. Again, increasing that thermometer that you have. And this is why somebody like a life coach is so essential, because they help you. That's what I do with my clients. I help them integrate and stabilize within each of these new areas. So when you look at like number 1, he talks about your upper limit problem will be triggered at every single one of these barriers. So the first one is that this belief that you are fundamentally flawed in some ways. That is like the worst. It looked like chicken scratches right there. Sorry. So the fundamentally flawed. So the way this will show up is like, there's something wrong with me. So every person will have all of these. I think in the book, he talks about how most of us don't have all of them, but that you'll have, a couple of them maybe. So think about that for yourself. Do you get to that space where you feel like there's something just wrong with you, that you can't figure it out, that you'll never figure it out, and it seems like everybody else has the answers and they're all part of a group that has like a secret society that knows the answers? This was a huge one for me. I was convinced that there was some manual given to all these people and somehow it was not given to me because I was fundamentally flawed in some way. This was a huge part of really recognizing my upper limit problem, was recognizing when I think there's something wrong with me. So if one of these stands out to you, you can go over to the chat box and comment over there and share with us like how this shows up for you, because we can all learn from each other. So the second one is disloyalty or abandonment. So this is a belief that if you get to a place of success, you will be alone. Yes, I have felt this number one. Thank you, Carol, for sharing that. So when we get to this next one, I'm going to put this up here. There's this disloyalty and abandonment. And the way this will show up is that it almost feels like you're going against like your family standards in order to move into the zone of genius. I recognize this for myself because my family has a very strong generational history about what it means to be poor, that it's a very like noble thing, you know, to be poor. And I don't think it was ever meant to like come across that way, but my grandparents living on next to nothing, on my grandpa's mechanic salary, and my grandma like going to grocery stores and getting rotten fruit and feeding that to her kids. Like there was like so much pride that existed within that family story. So in order to move to that point where it's like I can throw food away if it's moldy, like it seems so bizarre, but like that was a really challenging thing for me to do at one point because I felt like I was abandoning like this like noble journey to like make things work no matter what. So that's where like the disloyalty and the abandonment starts to show up, is that there's some family story, something where you're going to get to some point where you're going to disappoint family members, loved ones, and you're going to be alone. So the next one is a burden, that the more success you have, the more burden you will be. This is another important one. And I see this a lot. I've had a lot of health problems for myself. And I saw that I felt like my body was a burden on our finances. And so it didn't matter, like I couldn't enjoy success because I still had so many physical problems that were using family funds. Another example of this is, you know, I've got clients that have chronic pain disorders, autoimmune disease, all of that, that no matter what success they have, they can never enjoy it because they are fundamentally burdening on other people. So something else, it's like really feeling like you've committed a crime that you have no idea what that crime is. That's the burden. So then the fourth one is outshining. And you'll know if this will happen if you close your eyes and you think for just a second, if I become successful, I will make somebody feel bad. And this is really hard as a mom, I'm going to be honest, because you want to make sure that like your kids and everybody's feeling good and successful and they're growing. And if somebody has like a really amazing skill set in one area, if you're not aware of it, your other kids will start to feel really bad about themselves. So what you do is either help that one kid say, oh, don't talk about it, or don't say that around your sibling, or, you know, whatever that is. Like this is a big problem in very gifted children, as he talks about in the book, and just something to be aware of as a mom. So really go for yourself. Okay, yes, Erica, I love this. All the other moms in business seem to have balance figured out. Why can't I? Yes, that fundamentally flawed. So go through, recognize for yourself if there's any others, and you can go over to the chat box and comment. Linda said number 2, disloyalty and abandonment. Yes, that's a huge one for a lot of people because we have these generational stories that like we're really proud of. So this is how your ULP, your upper limit problem, is triggered by these underlying beliefs that exist, these fundamental beliefs that exist. So in order to spot when these happen, let me erase this. He gives us, let's see, five different spots. I think of these as like symptoms, okay? Now, think about it like when your kids have an ear infection. I know some of you have like young adults. Think back when they were little kids, like the ear infection, sometimes they start complaining that their stomach hurts, or sometimes they start complaining that there's ear pain, but you don't know, maybe you just went swimming and there's a little water stuck in there. But all of that is a symptom of something more going on. And when you spot those symptoms, you can get to the root of the problem. So what he's talking about right now, in these are 5 different symptoms, things to be on the lookout that you will do when your upper limit has been triggered. So the first one is worry. and I can't scroll up right at this moment, but somebody was talking about worry on here in the chat box. Yes, worry is a sign that you have hit your upper limit problem. The other one, so he talks, well, let me mention a couple others. He talks about criticism and blame. That you'll usually see this start to show up if you've created some kind of villain in your life. Maybe that's a partner, maybe that's your children, you know, whatever, some kind of villain. You'll know that you've moved into that. Deflection. Now, deflection would be like if somebody gives you a compliment, like, hey, I really like your haircut. And instead of saying thank you, you say, oh, but I know, but like it just wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. And you start making it like justifications for why you can't accept that compliment. So that's deflection. Another one he talks about is squabbling. I love that word. It just feels very fun to me. So this is like the race to be the victim. So this will show up for my mom clients when they're looking at housework. Why can't everybody help me around the house? Why am I doing all of this by myself? I can say these very easily because they come out of my mouth too. Like you have to be very clear, like when that starts to happen, it's a symptom that you've hit your upper limit problem. So then the next one is if you're sick and hurt, sick or hurt. Now he talks about, you know, sometimes a headache is just a headache, but oftentimes if you lean into them as an upper limit problem, you'll start to reveal a lot of things like our bodies are amazing. What I noticed was that I always felt like a cold was coming on. And I remember the first time I read this book, I was like, that's kind of weird because I always feel like there's something coming in my throat, you know, like that beginning tickle. When I started to lean into it and to really recognize, like, when is it coming up? It was always for me when I was not voicing an opinion that I wanted to share. It was like my body had moved out of integrity in this way. And as a result, my throat started to hurt. The other one that's really fascinating to me is my heartburn. My heartburn will literally shoot out of the sky no matter what, like in the weirdest moments, like, and then it'll go back down. And it's like, whoop, whoop. It is the strangest thing. And I've really started to lean into it on like, how is this a symptom I've hit my upper limit? And it's typically when I'm not taking care of my body in the way that I actually want to. So in those moments, it's like I'm sitting around watching TV when I know I actually want to be exercising. It's like my heartburn will jump up and jump down. So fascinating. So really get clear that like when times like sickness and hurt start to come up, that's when you can get really clear, like, how is this my upper limit? And so one of the things that I always, the way I refer to it, so I've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia. It's a chronic pain disorder. So my body feels a lot of pain. But when I use that, and he talks about this in the book, and it's the first place I ever learned it. When we use this as a way to spot our upper limit problem, I can use my body to see where is my next area of growth. Okay, I'm feeling like a lot of pain in my hands. It's like because I've been clenching my hands so much because I'm afraid of my next step of growth. So I call it my talking body. And we can start to use our body to our benefit to help show us what's happening in our mind. So all of these things, you can go in the book and you can read more about these. But he talks about how oftentimes we get very addicted to these symptoms, and we think that they're useful in some way. Now, if you're not progressing forward, if it's not producing a different result for you, then it's an upper limit problem. If you get to this spot and you recognize this is an upper limit problem, that's your first step of your growth in breaking through to your big leap. So we're going to talk about like how you move beyond these. So what he talks about is the very first thing is you have to commit to yourself. If you don't believe it's possible for you, you will never move to your zone of genius, excuse me. You will never move to your zone of genius unless you commit to it. I want you to really let that sink in, because that will change everything for you. If you do not commit to yourself of looking for these symptoms, if you do not commit to yourself of breaking through every single one of those barriers, you will never move to your zone of genius. but it all starts with 1, committing to yourself, and 2, believing it's possible for you. That's it. That's like, that is how you break through. So he talks about in the book, when you get to this spot, that first step is that commitment. And I love what he says. It's so simple. And our brain will tell us it's not enough. There must be more to it. But no, it is actually this simple. So he talks about the first is to say it out loud. So I want you, if you're in a spot where you can, I want you just to say out loud, I commit to living in my zone of genius. If you're not in a space where you can do that, write it down on a piece of paper. Think it in your mind. Do something. Write it on a sticky note, stick it into your bathroom. Say it out loud. I commit to living in my zone of genius. So I want you to stay for just a second. Really feel that within your body. Again, our body is amazing. It can talk to us. Allow that excitement and that energy to be felt in your body. So then the next thing is you'll notice doubts, and you'll notice your mind wander. So take a break. So just give yourself just a chance, 5, 10 seconds even. Take a deep breath. Allow that to feel. Notice if your body starts to shift out of it already. And then say it again. I commit to live in my zone of genius. But not just up here say it, but like feel it in your soul, right? This is how you break through. All of the rest were just signs and symptoms when you've hit your limit. Now this is how you start moving the needle on your thermostat. So when we get to this point, he says that now that you've committed to it, you have to learn how to enter into your zone of genius, how to discover things within this space. So he gives us some really amazing questions. And the way he describes it is like thinking about a Russian doll and how each shell that you're taking out of that doll, there's something else that exists within there. When you get down to that bottom one, that's your zone of genius right there. So I can't draw a Russian doll, I'm going to be honest with you. So we're going to draw some circles instead. So the first question I want you to ask, and I would write these down, and as you do, I want you to think about a big circle. Okay. So the first question is, what do I love the most? Now, for me, when I asked myself that, it was very clear. I love being with people. I also love being by myself, but I feel really energized when I'm around other people. Okay, so that was one of the things. What work do you do that doesn't seem like work? So what work do you do that doesn't seem like work? So, or it doesn't seem like work. So for me, when I looked back at all of the jobs that I had, it was very clear. Like being able to talk about people's lives with them. My husband used to laugh, like we would go to really beautiful places in the world and I didn't care about any of the sights. I just wanted to sit and talk to people about their lives. Like that does not seem like work to me at all. So then the next question is, where do you get the highest ratio of abundance or satisfaction based on the time that you've spent? Okay, so we're going to say highest satisfaction based on time spent. Now, if these don't come to you right off the bat, that's okay. Nothing's gone wrong. This is just a new way for your brain to be thinking. Give yourself some space and some grace to kind of feel this as you go. So for me, I get the highest satisfaction right here. Actually, I'm going to run out of space right there. I get the highest satisfaction when I'm talking about people's emotions with them. When I'm talking about their lives and the patterns of their brain. Like, to me, that is my highest satisfaction. I can be on a call with a client and be on top of the world for the rest of the day. Like, within 1 hour, I can go from like really sad to like soaring high. Like, it is the most amazing feeling to me. So that's my highest satisfaction return on the time that I spend. So then the last thing is, what is your unique ability? And this was the hardest one for me to answer. It took me a little while to figure it out. But like, what was my highest contribution? It was like my skill within a skill that people would comment on that I didn't see as something unique, but other people did about me. And so I kind of had to lean on some of the feedback that I was getting from other people. But for me, within there, it was that I could explain things about problems and solutions in a very clear way. Like, the way I presented things, like it didn't make sense to me. Like, of course, like, this is the pattern that's happening and this is clearly the solution. So when I got really clear on what these were, and I read this, long before I became a life coach, this is what I took in to figure out, okay, well, what is the career path like that allows me to do these things? It was very clearly, it was a certified life coach. Like, I just knew, like, right off the bat, like, this was my zone of genius. This is where it lights a fire so deep within my soul. And so for me, that was very clearly. So what do you love the most? What work do you do that doesn't seem like work? Where do you get the satisfaction based on the time spent? And what is your unique ability? I'll give you one example. I want you to go through and circle this for yourself. Like, go through and do these circles. Again, if you get to a point where you're like, I'm not actually sure, that's okay. So one of the other things was that I can see what is. That's very easy for me. I can see things at a pretty neutral place. And then I start looking for patterns. So one of the things about my mind, I'm dyslexic. And so I see patterns. It's almost like things start to come up off the page. That's like the only way to describe it. And it used to be very distracting when I was in school because I couldn't memorize things. It was very challenging because I had to be able to see things in patterns. But then I had the unique ability to be able to study these patterns and then redesign them. So it's like, when I think about my home, for example, and this is where the skill comes in, that I do so much work with my clients, is that, like, I create systems within my home that are all flowing together so that it's not distracting me from the work that I feel called to do. It's actually supporting me. And the way, like, my mind thinks about it, it's like it comes off the page and it starts like spinning around me. That's one of my unique gifts that I had, but I had to go through these questions to be able to get very clear on that. Now that's what I bring into my coaching, and I can bring that to my clients. So I want you to get really clear on, what is this for you? What are your unique gifts that you have to offer the world? If you don't see them inside of yourself yet, that's okay. I promise you that you will, as long as you give yourself space to explore all of these. So he says at this point, this is where it's like you start taking like all your upper limits, you start moving beyond it. This in and of itself is the most rewarding thing that you can feel. It's like this deep fulfillment that, like, you wake up with purpose every single day. Like, my life is different. It's like a seismic shift has happened, moving into that zone of genius. That's what I want for every single one of you. So when he says, when you answer these, you'll start to see when the upper limit will bring you back out of that zone of genius. Be very clear on all of those symptoms so you can catch it immediately as soon as it happens. So he gives us a mantra that we can repeat for ourselves, something to kind of recenter our body, to move us, back into those positive feelings. He says, I expand in an abundance, success, and love every day. As I do, I inspire those around me to do the same. So I want you to really think about that. I expand. This is, like coming in, like the flow of energy that exists within the zone of genius. I expand in abundance, success, and love every day. And as I do, I inspire those around me to do the same. So really feel that within your body. This is the gift that he's given us, that we are able to expand, we're able to increase that thermostat for ourselves and move into the zone of genius to live on a completely different level. It will feel out of nature at first because you have a human brain. Your human brain will want to snap you back. It's your job to continue to expand in that abundance, in that success, in that love and creativity. So just a couple things just to wrap up that we didn't have a chance to talk about on this call, because I want to leave a couple minutes for questions. But he does talk about Einstein time, which is like one of my favorite things to geek out. So if you read the book and you have questions about Einstein time, send me a message. But the way he talks about it is that we are where time comes from. And the way he describes it is like putting your hand on a hot stove for a minute can feel like an hour, but being with loved ones for an hour can feel like a minute. This is like the expansion, the shifting in possibility. This is how you're able to get more done in less time, is when you really embrace a completely different way of thinking about time, from a place of like abundance instead of a place of like, it's never enough. So something to think about. And then he also gives us some really great information about the enlightened no. And I love that phrase, because we think sometimes like saying no can be a very hard thing. But the way he talks about it is like the enlightened no, and that can change the course of history forever, is when we feel something is outside of our zone of genius, that we dedicate ourselves and the priorities that we have to live in that zone of genius. Sometimes that means we have an enlightened no, that yes, this is beyond my zone of genius and I'm not going to do it right now, but thank you very much for the offer. So gather all your stuff, come back for a second. Hope you took a lot of really good notes. We're going to just, if you have some questions, I'm going to leave time for questions. So go over to the chat box, type in any questions or anything that has stood out to you. So all of this is the beginning. And I hope that you'll go back. I'll send the replay tomorrow. Go back and listen to this. Like, let all of this information stir in your mind over and over, because this is how you are going to move into your zone of genius, how you reach your full potential forever. And it's amazing. Can the zone of genius change over time? I believe it can. I don't think he talks specifically about that, but I know that there have been times where I have hit the zone of genius and I have felt pivots starting to happen within there. And like okay, let me just share really quick, Linda, this example. So many years ago, I started a nonprofit. So passionate about this nonprofit. I came alive. We were helping terminally ill parents. We were raising funds for these families who had a parent who was dying, and they had young kids. So I felt really alive. I felt like this was within my zone of genius, but I got to the point where I knew it wasn't my stopping point. And I knew that there was some other mark I was meant to leave on this world. And that's actually about the same time that I found the book, The Big Leap. And I was able to just shift and pivot just a little bit. I think the foundation that I had was a precursor to my next steps. So I never saw it as like, I should have kept going with it. I failed at it. I quit at it. None of that. It was that this was all preparatory for my next steps. So that's where, Linda, as you're thinking about your zone of genius, like if it's changing and evolving, how has everything up until this point prepared you for this next evolution of your zone of genius? So something to consider. So I truly do believe, as he mentioned in the book, that the way to move into this And to stay there is that integration, that is that stabilization. And that is what I do offer my clients, is that we figure out what this zone of genius is. We discover that together. And I walk you through the exact steps to break through those barriers, to stay in this new place for good. So if that is something that you're ready for, if you're ready to wake up feeling that fulfillment, if you're ready to stop crying when you watch Moana, but cry out of joy instead of like this deep like pain that you're not answering, if you're ready to be more present with your loved ones, to show up every single day, if you're ready to reach your goals like with ease and to start setting them and reach this new level of growth, reach out to me, please. I do a free consultation. We can get on the call, and in that moment, you're going to get very clear on what your upper limit is, what your symptoms are, and what your zone of genius is, and how you can continue that